Hey, it's Joshua Vergara. What's going on, everybody? I just want to be sure that I did a quick segment before I put my mask on. Got a new one here. But yeah, front-facing camera of the OnePlus Nord. And not just that, this is the wide-angle camera. Now, I can't change to the other lens while recording, but let me tell you my already favorite feature just at the outset of this video. 4K video recording on the front using either lens. Look at this. This is awesome. Hopefully the audio sounds good. Let me know how it sounds in the comments. But also, I'm in my car, a little bit more isolated as far as the sound is. But also, once I have this mask on, I'm going to sound a little bit more muffled. So that's why I wanted to be sure that I got this done first. Alright, it's finally time to talk about the OnePlus Nord and give you some extra thoughts. Here's the thing though. I am going to be giving you my top 5 complaints and takeaways for this phone in a couple of days. There are a bunch of reasons why I'm excited to use the cameras on this phone, and of course one of them is that the rest of the phone is really affordable. This thing comes in at 399 euros, and there's even a more base model that's only available in India for something like $335. It's really great to see OnePlus back in the value segment. So far, the performance from this phone has been pretty great. The Snapdragon 765G with the 8GB of RAM and 256GB of onboard storage that I have in my model are working perfectly fine for my day-to-day tasks, including days like this where I took this phone to a couple of locations and I ended up using the cameras for an extended period of time. Now, to set the scene here, I did go to a couple of different locations. I'm a member of both the Huntington Gardens and also the LA Arboretum. Now, these two places are going to be more like flower and greenery heavy with a little bit of scenery, but in the case of the Huntington, I went with the good friend TK Bay, and you can follow his links in the description down below. He has content on the OnePlus Nord as well. And then after that, at the LA Arboretum, I just walked around during kind of the golden hour sunset period, so I was putting this phone in some of the best situations and scenarios that it should perform well in. So let's start off with the rear cameras. Obviously, you've already been seeing some samples from the phone. You have a 48 megapixel main sensor. It's the exact same sensor that is from the OnePlus 8, not the 8 Pro, the regular OnePlus 8. And that means that you can get some 48 megapixel shots, so you can get some high resolution shots that also allow for HDR to enhance the scene, so that's nice to see. Aside from that though, you get regular 12 megapixel photos from that main sensor when you're just in the auto mode and you don't really mess with anything. There's an 8 megapixel ultra-wide camera, and you know that I really enjoy having ultra-wide cameras on smartphones in general because you could just fit more in the scene, especially if you have some sort of tight quarters, then you'll be able to still fit most of the scene that you see right in front of you into one photo. It's also capable of 4K video recording. Now, a quick note on that. A few people were asking me how an 8 megapixel sensor is able to do 4K video recording, much less the front-facing camera, which has an 8 megapixel ultra-wide that can do 4K at even 60 frames per second. Here's the thing, there are plenty of 8 megapixel cameras out there, even security cameras, where the sensors are literally made to cover the width and the height of a 4K frame. So kind of in a nutshell here, it's already a boon to OnePlus that they were able to make a sensor that supports 4K, whereas other phones which are moving down to 8 megapixels for their ultra-wide cameras in particular have not tuned them to achieve that video resolution. So what you're seeing in this video are going to be a lot of 4K videos, and the other thing that you'll notice is that I use the 4K Cine mode. If you haven't noticed already, I do like using Cinema 4K resolution for especially my main cameras. It's about 17 by 9, it's not 16 by 9, it's not 18 by 9, but in the case of the OnePlus, it goes up to that 18 by 9, that 2:1 aspect ratio for some really cinematic shots. Black bars on the top and bottom for sure. Now, I'm just talking about the main sensor and the ultra-wide right now, and I'll give you a couple of thoughts on their quality. I think that these are good cameras for the most part. I don't actually see anywhere that OnePlus have skimped on their processing. It's just a matter of the hardware not being as high-powered as, let's say, the OnePlus 8 Pro, obviously, where I did really like the results that came out of that phone. So when it comes to the OnePlus Nord, it seems that there's a bit of a hit or miss, but it's mostly hit. In 4K video in particular, there are some times where I see more grain than I feel like there should be, and And in photos, sometimes the dynamic range could be better, but that's also because the auto processing in the camera app may or may not have recognized the entire scene properly. It's in those situations that you would tap and press on the screen in order to get the exposure that you want and mess with that slider. Most of the photos that you're seeing in this video have no taps or anything at all unless I say so otherwise. I just point it at the scene, see what it gives me, and if it looks like it would be alright, I hit that shutter button. Another thing I really appreciate about this camera interface in particular is that Oxygen OS's camera does something that I think only the Pixel camera is the only other one that does it. There's a little lock icon that you can tap to lock it all down. So it's easy to make sure that your video or your photo is not going to jump in exposure or focus just because you're moving the camera around. If you're focused on your exposure jumping all over the place, that's a dead giveaway that you're using a smartphone. There are a couple more lenses here on the back, and it's debatable as to their overall usefulness. A 5 megapixel depth sensor is obviously useful for things like portrait modes, but in these situations I just didn't really do a whole lot of actual portraits, and there wasn't anybody else with me to get portraits of me. I'll make sure to get a few more of those for my final top 5 complaints and takeaways video. Let me say real quick that I don't think macro photography is a bad thing whatsoever. It's great to see that phones are trying to add a little bit more, like maybe they're not prioritizing zoom, and if they don't, they go for macro photography. The only problem I really have with this lens is that it's a 2 megapixel lens. Even if I'm able to get really close up on things like flowers at the LA Arboretum, it's not like they come out looking very sharp anyway. So it's less about macro photography as a whole and more that you just don't get the hardware that's needed for you to actually enjoy macro photography. So that's something that we've said about macro lenses on other phones before, and it just kind of continues with the OnePlus Nord. But now we can get to the front-facing camera. You got this pill cut out on the front with 2 different lenses, both of which are used for a number of different functions. Now, first of all, you can get some pretty good selfies already. If you get into the portrait mode, there's a little bit more of a softening that happens on top of the background blur. It's kind of interesting that the camera app is able to discern what I look like or how to cut me out of the frame, even though I had my mask on for those shots. The main sensor is a 32 megapixel camera, and that's really nice that you can get higher resolution photos with your front-facing camera, and it's actually kind of wide enough. I already did some videos with it and I noticed that it wasn't super tight. Then you just get even wider of an angle when you get to the 8 megapixel ultrawide. Once again, 8 megapixels, but it's still able to do 4K video recording, which I obviously took advantage of when I could during those times, and I was able to record some pretty cool vlog-like video. The same little issues here and there that I noticed with the rear cameras happened on the front cameras. I did see that there was still a little bit of grain in places or in situations where I feel like there shouldn't be because the lighting is fine. One other thing I didn't really do is 4K at 60 frames per second, which I missed out on that opportunity because the main thing I was trying to show was the ultra wide angle, but even then, 60 frames per second in front of a waterfall would have been the perfect opportunity. Apologies, it just slipped my mind. And on the topic of slow motion, you do get all of these other modes in the camera app. There's still plenty of things that you can do, including a pro mode. And I got into the pro mode to do something I rarely ever do in my real world camera tests. I went for just sort of the water trail effect by slowing down the shutter speed just a tad. Obviously this meant that I was overexposing the photo a little bit, but I just wanted to illustrate that things like this are possible with the OnePlus Nord camera also. And then finally, a couple of photos from the nightscape mode. Now, even though I said that dynamic range could be a little bit better in certain shots depending on how the camera app perceives the scene, one thing I love is that nightscape is here and it's able to make something out of potentially a nothing scene. While I may not prioritize this kind of super HDR night photography, it is nice that it's even here. That way, if you do find yourself in some of those situations where you need a bit of a boost, well, that mode is available in the app. And so there you have it, the cameras of the OnePlus Nord featured in this real-world camera test. Just wanted to get a bunch of samples and throw them on the screen for you. I want to know what you think of all of them, and the video footage, of course, in the comment sections down below. Have discussions on the quality, let me know what you think about them. And yeah, the reason why those cameras and all of these pictures and videos are on people's minds is because this is another affordable OnePlus device. They have finally returned to the value segment. So bearing in mind that this is a phone at under 400 euros, what do you think the camera brings to the table? I personally think that there are certain features that this phone has that plenty of flagships actually don't, including 4K on the front cameras. And those are things that might be important to you, especially if you're a big social media person. With all that said, though, we're going to go ahead and call it on this one. One of the main portions of this phone officially reviewed, but I will give you my top 5 complaints and takeaways for this phone in a couple of days. So make sure you subscribe to my channel if you haven't already so you can keep up with when that comes out and when videos come out on this channel in general. From there, drop some likes on this video at the very least, and like I said before, get into the discussions down below. With all that said, I'm going to go ahead and call it on this one. Thank you so much for watching, and until my next video, I'll just remind you to enjoy your tea, everybody.